Hello and welcome back to the Home Lab, and I've got another interesting video for you today. What we're going to look at is some early transistor technology, and I think for some of you it's going to bring back some happy memories of tinkering with electronics in your youth. So for those of you who've been watching and following my videos, you might remember that recently I had a really interesting email from a viewer of this channel who said, my father collected interesting bits of electronics. Let me send you a photograph and see if you're interested in featuring any of them. Well, what came was this incredible box packed full of really early and really interesting computer technology, particularly circuit boards, including the fantastic valve-based Pegasus board. But also in there, when we unboxed it, was a little box. Here it is. And it says on it, germanium PNP junction transistors, quantity 100 and GT3s. And that would have been incredibly expensive in its day, thinking about it. But of course, when I took the lid off, there were lots of other things in here. So what I thought we'd do today is investigate some of the really interesting transistors and diodes that were sent to me. And I think for some of you, it'll be a real trip down memory lane. Right, so let's have a look at what's in this box. So we'll open it up. And it's certainly not 100 GT3 transistors, but it is a very interesting amount of other transistors and diodes. So if you remember, it was Charlie who got in touch with me, and he said his father was involved in electronics and early computing, and he had this incredible collection of items. But one of the things that was really interesting was they were all really well labelled. And so in this box was an absolute treasure trove of bits and pieces and lots of early transistors. So what we'll do is we'll have a look through some of these, and it will range from early germanium transistors to some silicon ones, and then some very, very interesting items here, which I'll talk about in a second. So Charlie's dad, he worked at Catterick with the Royal Signals, and then spent some time working at a number of other places. And I remember Charlie saying that he lectured all over the place on communications and electronics. And he mentioned a visit as a child to Los Alamos, where his dad was lecturing, and he had to content himself with the Bradbury Museum because he didn't have the security clearances. But in went his dad and did whatever he did and came out later. And what a fascinating career he must have had. But during that career, with a lot of teaching, he amassed an awful lot of interesting items. And so what we'll do now is look at some of the diodes and the transistors that he'd saved. So what I'm going to do is pull a few items off the pile, and we'll talk about them and the history behind them, and maybe you'll remember some of them well. So the first one I notice is in this sealed plastic package. And those of you who have ever worked in electronics for the military will recognise this sort of thing straight away. So transistors and diodes in this case came wrapped up in these little plastic bags. And what's interesting about this one is, as far as I can tell, there's stock codes on it, but it says semiconductors, but I don't know what this stock number is. So you get in close and you have a really good look, and there's a diode in there, and it's a CV7076. So straight away we're onto the CV system, and the CV system stands for common valve, and it was used in the UK for military components between all sections of the forces, and common valve obviously referring to the days when these were used for labelling thermionic valves. That changed, and obviously they kept the numbering system going, and they had to use designations. I think the early diodes were sort of CV in the hundreds, and there were lots of valves as well. And I think they were described just as crystals because they contained bits of germanium. And then when the CVs got up to about 2000 and numbers from then onwards, you began to see transistors coming in. So The other thing with this is you need to find out what a CV7076 is, unless you know off by heart, and I wonder if any of you do. So you look up an equivalent, and it's an OA47. And the OA47 was a gold-bonded germanium diode, and it was used possibly in crystal sets, but as a detector for radios. So we'll put that one over there. Here's another one, exactly the same package. I think the diode looks the same, so there was a few of those. Here's an interesting one, Valve Electronic CV448. And again, what you have to do is you have to look up an equivalent to find out what the CV448 was. And this is a GEX 54. So this was for radio and TV reception. So the diode in there, and written on it, perhaps you can't see it at the moment, but I need to get a close-up, is the CV number. Now, I'm going to do a lot of talking, looking around me to find my books. This might bring back some memories for some of you, that if you want to know what a transistor is, if you don't know the CV code or you need an equivalent, then we really didn't have the internet when we were kids. So you had to have a book and you had to look it up in books such as this, which is just an equivalence guide. Or I'm sure many of you will remember Towers, and Towers had lots of transistors in it, and in it were equivalents and lots of them, and a little bit of information about the transistors and what package they were, etc. So that was a book you absolutely had to have. And I wanted to say, if ever you read books and keep books at home, when you read them, write the date in the inside cover, and also write when you bought it. So there we go. That was me. The Francis didn't get used very much when I was younger, so Jones ARF. Bristol, 1987. Well, I know what that was because I've got the date in there. That was my interview at Bristol University, probably to do electronics. I didn't end up at Bristol, went to UMIST, which I don't think really exists anymore, and then Cambridge after that. But when I went down to the universities as a 17 or 18-year-old, I would try and find a bookshop and try and find some interesting books. And I note on the back, £12.95. So think about the inflation there. That's about what books sort of cost now. So that was a lot of pocket money, but you had to have it. And this has stayed with me all of those years. But I was just saying to you, by writing the date in something, it takes you back. It's like writing the date on the back of photographs. So another thing you need if you're using these books is the incredible small print that was in them. So I've got a good lens to look, and you think, well, why is he telling me about a lens? How boring is that? But I'm a physicist. This is, you might see the join. This is an achromat pair, and if you know about achromat lenses, they use two different curvatures glued together, and the beauty of those is you don't get any distortion, chromatic distortion at the edges. So they're used for camera lenses and enlargers and things. So absolutely brilliant. Way better than a magnifying glass for looking at the tiny print in these books. So let's keep digging in. Another CV448 there, and there it is. And you'll notice that the diode itself looks really old, this kind of packaging. So I'll keep turning them over. Now that's rather nice. We've hit a transistor here. This is a GEC GET3 germanium transistor, about 1956, that sort of period that these came out. It's got 3 wires on it, and you might go, well, yeah, it's a transistor, FJ. But just wait for it. There are transistors that have more than 3 wires. And sealed up there, it looks like the military sealing, but it doesn't have any of the military part numbers on it. We think GET might be a General Electric transistor, General Electric tube. I'm not quite sure where that designation comes from, but don't be fooled, not all GE transistors were made by General Electric, and it's all very confusing because lots of the companies were bought out by each other. So that's just a blank tag, and then here's an interesting diode. This is the ZS31A. It's also got its CV part number 7119, and on the back it describes it quite correctly as a rectifier. So I'm trying to find some things that you might remember quite well. that may well be one, a very early germanium transistor, the GET 875, and that was a high frequency switching transistor for radio intermediate frequency stages, and it says on the back, fast switch. I wonder whether Charlie's father was thinking about a transistor that switches very quickly being used for some computing applications. And then this will bring back memories. A little diode here, little glass diode, and it's an OA47 with its CV code, of course, and that's our gold bonded sort of crystal radio and detector diode again. So it's the one we saw earlier in these packages. Right, we'll keep digging in here. More diodes. So this is an interesting diode because this was made by AEI, and it's all written on CGB3H. I think it's an 83H actually, if I read that correctly. And that was another gold bonded germanium crystal diode for detection in radios. Now, I sort of find it interesting that we're going to dig in here and find diodes that were made by British and Dutch companies, I'm thinking Mullard particularly, and yet we're dealing mainly with germanium here, which gets named after Germany by the chap who first discovered germanium about 150 years ago. So an early transistor here now, the OC200, again with its CV designation, and that's a silicon one. So when I say early, it's quite early for silicon transistors. It's PNP transistor. What have we got on the back? General purpose silicon transistor, and really good for audio amplification. And just look at the size of it. I mean, I know that's obvious to us, but to younger people, that's huge compared with the sort of surface mounted things that we had. So we've got a collection of silicon here which came later, and we've got germanium that was earlier. So why did they use germanium? Well, germanium's actually much rarer than silicon. I mean, silicon, you just sort of dig it up from the beach, it's sand. Silicon is particularly difficult to dope and prepare for transistors and diodes, so it took a while before they could do that effectively. Germanium was what was used. It's quite a bit rarer. It has to be extracted from other metal ores, and germanium has some really good properties and some really annoying properties. It's very temperature dependent, which is a bit of a nuisance, but some of its good properties are the fact that the holes, I'm not sure I'm describing it very well here, but the holes can migrate very quickly. You can get recombination very quickly. So it works in very fast environments. It can switch very, very quickly. It's also sort of light sensitive as well. So it's particularly good in sort of optical situations. It doesn't form the oxide layer quite as easily as silicon does. So it's really not as good to prepare these days for diodes and transistors. But I say that because don't think that germanium has had its day. Germanium is used an awful lot now in all sorts of applications, and particularly very modern photonics, solar cells and things like that. So there we go, point contact diode. You probably know what that means. I always think of that as being a sort of mini... what's the word? Cat's whisker. So a little bit of germanium with a tiny little bent spring pressing on just one point. And that's our OA81. And I'm sure some of you have used many of those. So here's an interesting device, silicon controlled rectifier. I'm not sure I found out an awful lot about this one. But I've got BTX18. I think that's what it might be. But it was very difficult to see on the package what it actually was. Right, xenodiodes, or is it xenodiode? So you know these guys put in circuits sort of back to front, and they break down at a certain voltage and therefore hold that voltage. I don't know if I looked up what this was or what was written on it. Might have been a case of I couldn't quite see it. Job for the magnifying glass. Right. Let's dig in a bit further. So GT103 transistor, old favourite that one, audio amplifier. What have we got on the back here? general purpose audio amplifier and low frequency switch. Yep, so that's that one. And then trying to pick some things where you'll recognise the cases. Okay, I'll turn it that way around to begin with. I'm sure you'll recognise that case shape. So, it's written on it if you can see it on the picture. Black case, red dot, sort of domed top, and of course that always makes you think Mullard. So there's an early Mullard germanium gold bonded diode. It's the OA5. Now, this is really interesting. So I know I'm talking a lot. I always say that to my students. But this is a really important diode because this was used a lot for core switching in really early computers. And it was used a great deal in the ICT 1301 computer, which was a sort of early computer from the 1960s. And one or two of them still exist. They all had names. And Flossie was the one that was at London University and made its way up to Bletchley Park. So that would have been jam-packed full of these diodes. And they came from Mullard. I can't see... Ah, yes, I do remember this now. That I was looking to see where it was made. Oh, it says British made, so that's one made in Britain. Don't be fooled by that. Mullard, you always think of, and when I was a child, everything was made in Britain. Bit of a con, actually, because Mullard by this time was owned by Philips in Holland, and I think Philips bought Mullard in the 1920s. So all these British-made components gave British people jobs, that's sure, but wonder where the profits were going. But it's interesting, this one has had the black paint scraped off it, and often people did that because, remember what I said about germanium? You could shine light on it and it would act as a photo transistor. Remember the photo transistor here only having two legs, and I wonder whether Charlie's father did that to show the junctions or to show how its behaviour and conductivity changes when you shine light on it. So there we go, the OA5, very, very important diode in early computing. And so if we're going for Mullard, this makes an interesting point. Wrapped in a heatsink here, you can see the gold-plated legs on this Mullard GET 116. And I mentioned this because it's germanium, I think a half-watt PMP transistor. But you remember that Mullard was part of Philips, which was sort of part of GEC. So if you see GE something on transistors, don't always think that it must be just GEC. There were lots of factories making them, and that's embedded in its own heatsink. So we've got a few more to go, and then some very interesting items. So you might recognise the yellow case on this one, and that classic case shape. There's your Mullard OA10, and the OA10 was also used in some very early computers as a sort of switching diode. What have we got on the back? Nothing, but Charlie's father wrote copious notes about how these behaved, and he mentioned, of course, it's a germanium junction switching diode. We've got a power rectifier here, and it's a bit difficult to see, but this is a Mullard one. They have Mullard written on it, and this is the GEX 541, and he's written on it what I think it'll do more than 4 amps actually, but up to 80 volts, and again the CV code, so you could look that up in a data book. Some other transistors here, the AFZ12 with its CV number. And let's see what he's written on the back. There we go, VHS, I'll try and get my words right, a VHF amplifier, so used in radio circuits. A few more here, another Zener diode, and that was made by AEI. Now, it's worth mentioning that you think of Mullard and a couple of other companies. I think, was it in the UK there were 100 companies making semiconductors? There might have been more. So we know the big ones, but there were lots and lots of companies. They were forever getting eaten up by each other. So 5.1 Zener voltage on that one. And I've written on the back, I think it's an MR51, but I'm not totally sure. So, silicon controlled rectifier there, and this one has that very long part number, so you can see why it's easier to say CV7331. And this is a high voltage one and a reasonably high current one. And you can see the 3 terminals and the fact that you could bolt it onto a chassis and keep it cool. Another diode here, the ZR11. Now this is interesting because the ZR11, I don't know if it's written on it, don't think I can see it, was typically manufactured by Ferranti. And I note that Charlie's father seemed to have some kind of connection with Ferranti. And he had a lot of Ferranti bits and pieces, especially the circuit boards out of computers and that one out of the Pegasus computer, which was built by Ferranti. Seen these ones before, the CV448 diode, and I'm keeping a few bits to the side here. And finally, well, I'll do this one. And I did write on it here, this is a GET, is it 103? And GT 103, not quite sure why it's mounted up like that, and completely badly soldered, but that was used as an audio amplifier. So, good collection of transistors there. Just before we finish, I'm going to show you something really, really interesting, and it's a really important part of computer history. Right, so let's clear some space for these really interesting items. You might not have seen this sort of thing before unless you were involved in computer architecture and that sort of thing. But what these are very, very early sort of integrated circuits. And you can tell partly by the part numbers. So this is Mullard having a go at sort of building an IC. So this is an FF1, and if you think ICs, you think computing, and you think FF, you can probably guess what it is. Charlie's father, as you might guess, has labelled it perfectly. And if that will stand up. So he's put on it, it's a Mullard logical block, and it's a flip-flop single entry device. So what you've got in here from 1963 is an attempt to pot up a number of transistors and resistors in a little case. And so that can be one sort of logic circuit, like your ands, nors, nots and nans. And this one is a flip-flop from Mullard. These are really, really interesting. So these mini logs, I don't know, they were used in computers, but I don't know how long they lasted for, were built by Elliott Brothers. I'm stating the obvious here. And Elliott Brothers actually showed these off at the Radio and Electronic Components Show in Olympia, which was 1963. And they were exhibiting their latest series of mini logs. And what these are, again, are potted little circuits, and inside there are a series of transistors and resistors. So it's RTL, resistor transistor logic, and I'm going to do a video on that. And there weren't a great deal of them, but you can look up what each one was. And I looked at these, and I think one of them, I think it's the type 7, if I remember rightly. That one is 2 NAND gates. So they put some AND gates in, and then using the power supplies, etc., inverted the signal. So for those of you, what does it say on here, by the way? Miniature logical element. Okay, it doesn't tell you what it is, but I'm pretty certain that's 2 NAND gates. So there you go. For those of you who know your 7.4 series, and you'll be aware that those little black dual-in-line circuits that you get, they contain the silicon resistors and connections inside them, but they're really, really tiny in the modern dual-in-line packages. So in fact, the package is huge compared with what's actually inside them. But these, I think, actually have probably individual components potted inside them. So their size is really important, and I think you're not going to get them much smaller. One of the other advantages of these is their shape, and they can be put together in computer circuits and sort of nested next to each other to make very, very well-arranged arrays of these little rectangle blocks, and you had circuit boards covered in rows and rows of these. Well, we've moved on, and this technology didn't last very long, but I guess companies got together and said, okay, let's decide on a package for our integrated circuits, and they decided that these were not what we wanted, and they went for the smaller dual inline package. Charlie's father also included these really interesting devices in the box, and they're labelled the size of an integrated circuit element. Now, actually, I don't believe that's what they are, but in fact, I think what he was doing was saying, look at how miniaturization is going, and we're getting to the stage now where we can put transistors, resistors and diodes on little tiny boards and feed them into these small transistor-sized packages. And so I think it's more for an example, because I think these are OC170 germanium PNP transistors, which are infamous for their tin whiskers. And the tin whiskers causes them to short out. And it's also a real problem in devices on satellites, the power supplies and the RF parts, that once you've built them, if they get tin whiskers, there's no way you can go up there and repair them. So I think these are actually Dutch Mullard OC170s, and they were used for mixer and oscillator circuits. And your QI question, how many legs does a transistor have? Well, the answer's 4. These had 4 legs, and one leg was for an interleg shield that shielded the other pins and also connected directly to the case. But I think what's happening here is Charlie's father saying, look how small things will get if we cram more and more devices into one single package. So there we go. What an incredible treasure trove of items from Charlie's father, and I hope it's brought back some memories for some of you. I'm really grateful to him for sending these on to me to give me a chance to show them to you. And aren't we really grateful to Charlie's father, who looked after and collated these early items of germanium and silicon transistor and diode technology, and most importantly, labelled them so incredibly well. So I do hope you enjoyed that video and the contents of this little box. And isn't it amazing how a little box like this can contain so many interesting artefacts and, of course, more importantly, interesting memories and bits of history of electronics from times gone by. I guess some of you will remember playing with items exactly the same as this when you were building your early radios and maybe some of your crystal radios right at the start of your interest in electronics, and maybe careers came from that. Anyway, as you know, at the end of the video, when I've finished talking, I'll cut in some photographs of things that you haven't seen yet in the main body of the video. And hopefully, if I can get them to photograph okay, some close-ups of some of these items. So, I'll be making another video soon, and I do hope you'll join me then.